In 1993, the bloom had not yet come off the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle rose. To that end, Valiant Comics editor-in-chief Bob Layton approached writer Mark Moretti and artist Joe Quesada with a new idea for a modern take on the ancient shinobi.
In this case, the ninja, dubbed Ninjak, would be based more in the world of espionage rather than the hired killers that ninjas were usually portrayed as through much of media.
Of course, Ninjak would not be Japanese. Who ever heard of Japanese ninjas, am I right? Instead, it would be Colin King, a Brit living in Japan who was working for a spy agency called Weaponeer.
Keeping up with the tradition of Valiant using one comic to backdoor pilot a new character, Ninjak debuted in 2 issues of Bloodshot before getting his own ongoing series. That series proved popular as it was the first Valiant #1 to top the sales charts for both Diamond and Heroes World distribution.
Which leads us to an aspect that we have to address here with Valiant Comics. See, with a lot of Valiant heroes, Ninjak included, their origin story was not told in the first issue. Rather, there would be a special Zero issue that you had to collect the first 6 issues and then send in the proofs of purchase in order to receive. Yes, like cereal boxes.
However, there's an odd wrinkle, as Ninjak's origin would actually cover 2 Zero issues. The first being a Zero issue, which was then followed by a double Zero issue because I guess they were just trying to be cute with the whole spy thing. Also, if you recall the last time we covered one of these Valiant Masters collections, episode 99 of the Teen Super Team Harbinger, the way that book was collected was that it was issues 1 through 5 followed by the Zero issue. Now this trade was collected in a very similar manner, with it being issues 1 through 6 and then the 2 Zero issues. However, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently here.
See, I thought I was getting this whole trade collection through the Comixology Unlimited program, which is basically a digital library. You can borrow the comic, you can read it, you can give it back. However, it turns out the only part of the trade that's available through Comixology Unlimited is the introduction. Added to that, I can't just buy the whole collection outright. So instead, I have to go back into Comixology Unlimited and get each individual issue listed as being in the collection, which are available on Comixology Unlimited, but not in trade form, which just begs a whole lot of questions. Anyway, what I'm trying to get at here is I like doing things narratively, which means we're starting this by covering the 2 Zero issues that cover the origin of Ninjak in today's episode, which is Valiant Masters Ninjak Volume 1, Blackwater.
Chicago, 1950. A young Augustus Silk attempts to halt his abusive father in order to attend a prestigious science academy. This leads into a chase onto the streets where the inebriated patriarch stumbles and crashes through a pet store window and onto a tank of Black Widow spiders. Augustus notices a crushed egg sac as a spider bites on his father's neck and immediately kills him with its venom.
I guess Charlotte just couldn't wait for Wilbur to finish him off.
9 years later in London at a party in Buckingham Palace, MI5 agents Jonathan King and Neville Alcott are discussing a report from Japan that they're trying to develop para-humans, individuals with extraordinary powers to be used as super soldiers. The two then notice a woman named Catherine Howard making her way as guests begin whispering about her being involved with the married Lord Bloxland. This appears to be true as the two are soon alone and Catherine tries to hold the Lord up for some money. She seems to have some type of leverage, but they're interrupted by someone from the IRA posing as a waiter attempting to kill Bloxland. The assassin is interrupted by a charging Agent King who knocks him off a balcony. Catherine then immediately begins hitting things off with Jonathan.
Jonathan and Catherine manage to marry before they are transferred to Japan along with Alcott so that they can all participate in these para-human experiments to create super soldiers.
7 months later, and Catherine gives birth to a son named Colin. Despite being 2 months premature, the boy is otherwise healthy. Agent Alcott chalks all of this up to the various chemicals involved in the research, though Jonathan King is oddly mum on the subject. What doesn't help matters is that a Yakuza boss named Iwatsu has decided to also get involved on this parahuman idea and begun taking out several agents in order to try to get research for his purposes.
The Brits are also conducting parahuman investigation experiments with a company called Bodine in the U.S. The lead researcher of Bodine is none other than Dr. Augustus Silk, the young boy from earlier. And yes, there's a reason why we're following this Silk guy around.
Jonathan King spends the next few years developing his own ninja-esque skills in order to spy on Iwatsu and see his many attempts, which all fail. Meanwhile, Colin grows up in Japan and excels at several sports, including, of course, soccer. Along the way, he wins the affections of a young girl named Michiko and angers a bully named Goro.
It's not that Goro. Sorry.
That night, Colin spots his father heading out for another confrontation with Iwatsu. The mafia boss has long figured out who Jonathan King is. However, things get complicated when Colin's presence is detected, and soon father and son are surrounded by ninjas. In order to spare Colin's life, Jonathan mentions that he's part of the parahuman experimentation program, which gives Colin enough time to run away. Before he can get out any more information, one of the ninjas kills Jonathan with a katana blade while the others pursue Colin. Thankfully, help arrives in the form of Jonathan's two informants, Kyoko and Matsuda. Colin kills a ninja trying to attack Kyoko, and the trio wind up fleeing the premises. They arrive at a temple overseen by Matsuka's brother, who immediately takes them in when he hears Iwatsu is involved. Basically, Colin is going to be trained to avenge his father's death. However, he'll never wind up seeing his loved ones ever again. When news of this reaches Catherine, she fesses up that she was never actually part of the parahuman experimentation program, as Jonathan was not Colin's biological father.
Yeah, no dramatic gopher here. I mean, I think the pregnancy was pretty much telegraphed. Remember, Catherine had something that she was using to rope Lord Blacksland into a relationship or possible marriage, and it turns out that Blacksland had hired someone to kill Catherine, only for that individual to actually have been killed by the IRA assassins. So that's how that played out.
Colin begins training and making sure to stay out of the public eye until Michiko arrives at the temple with her father, a high-ranking politician named Okubo. Colin attempts to meet with Michiko by disguising himself as a monk and talking with her to make arrangements for a later meeting, which is witnessed by Kyoko. Fully aware of what the young man is planning to do, she decides that he needs to learn how to do things the proper way.
Ew.
After learning how to have sex, Colin meets up with Michiko and they have sex. Afterwards, they try to have a talk with Okubo, only for it to be revealed that he had actually been working with Iwatsu the whole time. Colin dons his Ninjak outfit and takes out the remaining ninjas, and then flees, electing to join the Weaponeer organization at Alcott's request. Back in America, Augustus Silk is involved in a lab explosion that renders him paralyzed and damages the moral centers of his brain. He goes on to form a shadow corporation called WebNet to stage a hostile takeover of Bodine Comstat, driving Bodine into ending his life, and begins funding illegal activities throughout the world.
Yeah, if you haven't figured it out, Dr. Silk winds up becoming Ninjak's chief antagonist. And it's here that we finally move on to the Ninjak ongoing series by starting the story arc known as Blackwater.
An arms trafficking deal in Paris culminates in the seller being betrayed by his own client and Dominique, the girl from the armed candy escort service. This is looked at from afar by Ninjak and a stray cat. He attacks the remaining gun smugglers and blows up their ship full of weapons, finding a WebNet bracelet that belonged to the girl. It turns out that Dominique also happens to have a date with none other than Colin King, so he's able to return it to her.
There'll be time for explanations later, and hopefully some sex.
Super fun happy time gets interrupted when the lead smuggler pulls up to the hotel. Colin sets things up so that Dominique is mistaken for him and winds up getting shot. Upon realizing their horrible mistake, the smugglers dread their eventual demise at the hands of Dr. Silk, while Ninjak heads back to Britain to report to his supervisor, Mont Blanc. Colin tries to explain to Mont Blanc that WebNet will look to respond quickly, but it falls on deaf ears. Even at this point, Silk has killed the remaining smugglers, via Black Widow spiders naturally, and started to go after other Weaponeer agents, eventually getting all the way up to Mont Blanc within a week. The chief gets wounded, but Ninjak arrives to get the wounded Mont Blanc to his car for a high-speed getaway. However, it turns out the car has already been booby-trapped and immediately begins rapidly filling with black water.
I guess they needed to be really specific when name-dropping the story arc.
The car gets so full of water that it begins to slow down. With no other choice, Ninjak slams on the brakes and catapults himself through the windshield. Unfortunately, by this point, Mont Blanc is already dead. Ninjak is soon forced to flee as French authorities begin arriving at the scene. Back at WebNet, Silk takes his chief advisor Fitzhugh to task for not ensuring that all of Weaponeer is actually dead. With his agency effectively destroyed, Ninjak is going to have to go rogue and utilize other spy agencies to track WebNet. To that end, he begins hacking the CIA computer at NORAD to track down the water sample from Mont Blanc's car to South America. The Americans are obviously beginning to go after Ninjak, however, their new British liaison, Neville Alcott, assures them that Ninjak is taking care of a much bigger problem. Ninjak is able to locate WebNet headquarters behind an Amazonian waterfall. He manages to make his way inside the facility and begins copying much of their files onto a CD-ROM.
Or he's uploading some type of self-destruct virus. I'm not entirely sure. It's really muddled and not explained very well. He carries the disc later, so I'm guessing that, yeah, he copied files onto it.
As things start falling apart, Fitzhugh abandons a woman named Sabrina to go after Ninjak. She picks up the disc, however she doesn't turn it over, only to reveal herself to be a CIA agent.
Unfortunately, it looks like Sabrina went a little too undercover as she was force addicted to heroin in order to become Silk's sex slave.
Ninjak incapacitates Fitzhugh and gets Sabrina onto an escape chopper as the base explodes. Of course, a later search of the wreckage does not turn up the bodies of Dr. Silk or Fitzhugh. Colin heads back to Britain where Neville Alcott is waiting. Since Weaponeer is gone, maybe Ninjak should just move over to MI5. His first assignment is to go back to Japan, which is where Colin really doesn't want to go. It turns out that a Yakuza boss named Matsudo has begun putting the screws to Senator Okubo, father of Colin's first love, Michiko. She's worried, but he has a plan as he uses his own personal ninja assassin named the Seventh Dragon to take out Matsuda's goons. Meanwhile, Colin is given a tour of his new facilities by Alcott's chief assistant Sinclair. It's there that he meets a familiar new agent, Bloodshot.
Bloodshot is former Mafia hitman Angelo Mortelli, who underwent an experimental surgery that laced his DNA with self-healing nanites that make him virtually indestructible. The drawbacks are that his skin is completely white and he has a large red circle on his sternum.
Colin meets with Alcott to explain that Britain really needs a newly negotiated trade deal to go through so the Japanese Reform Party can solidify power. However, the Yakuza oppose this as they would be cut out of several trade deals. To that end, it's rumored that they've actually gone out and kidnapped Michiko, but Okubo just says she's visiting family in another part of Japan. That being said, if she has been kidnapped, there's going to be trouble. The mentioning of Michiko is enough to pique Colin's interest, so he heads back to Japan to track down Matsudo, and it's there that he overhears a plan to kill Okubo. Ninjak takes down the killers and demands to know where Michiko is, but Okubo wants nothing to do with Colin.
Wanting Michiko to only marry a Japanese man, her father has forbid her from reconnecting with Colin Kane. However, she's refused all male suitors, which is why there's no grandchildren.
It's then that the Seventh Dragon arrives and chases off Ninjak, who just lies in wait in order to track the two to a country house where Michiko is waiting. This leads to another conversation as they begin arguing with each other, and it's revealed that the Seventh Dragon is none other than Goro.
It's still not that Goro, and yeah, he's one of Michiko's rejected suitors.
That being said, it turns out that Colin wasn't the only one doing the tracking, as Matsuda's forces have followed him to this location as well. A massive gunfight opens up, and the family is driven back into a small cave. Ninjak prepares for a counterattack, but Goro forces himself into the situation in order to seek honor.
Just put a bucket on your head and pick a fight with Steve James. That earns the respect of everyone.
Goro manages to destroy one of Matsuda's choppers, which provides enough of a distraction to Ninjak to attack the mobster. However, Matsuda manages to escape in another chopper, and it turns out that Goro was shot in the process. Ninjak manages to stabilize the wound, and it suddenly appears that the choppers are turning around. In reality, it's the authorities, with Michiko and her father dealing with them, as Ninjak takes Goro to a local hospital. The two then make their way to Matsuda's headquarters, where they square off once again. Goro manages to take down Matsuda by cutting off his hand, but Ninjak stops him short of killing. Days later, the legislation passes, and Colin prepares to bring Michiko back to England, but no. She explains that Okubo has terminal cancer, and he really wants grandchildren, so she's just going to stay behind and marry Goro instead.
Our next story involves one of Valiant's cornerstone characters, Eric of Dacia, a Visigoth who encountered an alien spaceship called Shannara, who kept him in a power armor that provided stasis that allowed him to exist until the modern day. Shannara provided enough technology that Eric eventually became a business magnate who fights evil in his power armor under the codename of Exo Man of War.
Eric is heading to his mountain mansion where he's suddenly attacked by a group of ninjas that drive him back to his company, Orb Industries, to find out why. Colin King is there at the office trying to get some other questions answered, only to get the cold shoulder from Eric. It turns out the CIA and MI5 are aware of the attacks on Eric's company and are attempting to help him and benefit their own respective governments. That being said, Eric's stonewalling means they'll have no other choice but to hack his computer. However, Shannara detects the hacking and actually reveals the real perpetrator, Dr. Silk.
Dr. Silk is working with the spider aliens of the planet Loa, who are the creators of Shannara and use her technology to conquer other worlds.
Ninjak and Exo Man of War have an encounter and agree to work together when they realize they are on the same side. Fitzhugh tries trapping them in a descending elevator car, but of course, the manservant leaves unaware that they could just as easily escape from the thing. Ninjak and Exo Manowar use Orb Industries' computers to track Silk down to his headquarters, and they crash in on the spider aliens and take them on while Silk leaves with Fitzhugh. Exo Manowar gets chased but is literally stonewalled. Still, the threat has been dealt with. For now.
That concludes our look at Valiant Masters Ninjak Volume 1 Blackwater. How was it? Well, I do think there's some decent artwork throughout all of this. Everyone looks correctly. The proportions are all good. I think everyone's easy to tell who's who. There's some nice punchy dialogue at some points, and I like that this is a very international book. It's obviously following two Brits. It's following, Japanese people. It's not all American-centric. There is an American presence, but it's not overwhelming. If there's a drawback, it's that while there is an international presence, if you're not white, you're not exactly a great character. The Japanese all talk in very stilted dialogue and give speeches about honor and gaijin, and it's a little rough. I understand it was the early 90s, but still, it's not a great presentation of the Japanese people. And likewise, Dr. Silk's manservant Fitzhugh is clearly, black. Maybe African American, who knows, but as a black man who's often presented as some kind of dunderhead. Not a good representation of minorities in this, unfortunately. I'm not saying there was an ill will in this, but again, if you're trying to read this, especially from a modern viewpoint, it's probably not for you. When they relaunched Valiant the numerous times, they at least brought back Colin King, so if you want to, I'd say start with more modern Ninjak than this one. Likewise, things could get muddled, as I said earlier. The plot in the first two issues was really hard to kind of get through. Again, they're trying to hint that maybe some of this genetic experimentation did affect Colin, but again, it was plainly obvious that he was, that Jonathan King is not his biological father. Like I said, that idea was kind of telegraphed, but then other points, it's just, they kind of keep harping on it, like, why do you keep saying that when you already disproved that in your own story? Again, maybe because that was technically released after the 6th issue, who knows? But still, it can be really hard to follow those things at times. Again, dialogue is very muddled, and I think attempts to try to be British don't work when they're trying to use the slang terms. So yeah, like I said, overall this can be kind of confusing. There are better Valiant books than this, I think. Harbinger I thought was a good one. I think even Rye was a little bit better than this. This was pretty flat. I am going to be giving Valiant Masters Ninjak Volume 1 a D. Again, it wasn't bad enough to really say I hated it, but it's not something I could just recommend. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review.
Hey guys, remember you can support my work at patreon.com/CP10 for Cat Productions, where you can even request a trade to be put in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box. Also, remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so that you can be notified for further videos.